Thank you very much, Chris. And thank you, Splice, for inviting me. And thank you all for sitting in this dark room when it's so beautiful outside and we only get good weather like twice a year. So I really appreciate that. So I'm going to talk about work that I've mostly been doing in this past year or so. And it's the gist of it is intelligent machines that learn. What do they know? Do they know things? Let's find out. So I'm a computational artist and I'm currently doing a PhD at Goldsmiths University. Loosely speaking, it's about AI and expressive human-machine interaction. And I'm mostly going to talk about that today, but like my recent work. But to give you an idea of where I come from, this is a collection of work up to about 2014. Oh, I can bring it closer. Sorry, okay. Well, I mean, who would you rather hear, Black Sabbath or me? I don't know. Anyway, so this is a collection of work up to about 2014. And I mean, this audience is probably the best audience to understand the motivations behind this kind of work, which is, I'm primarily a visual artist. I also work with sound. But I was always very interested in exploring new ways of creating, performing, and manipulating visual content. And my craft is in software, so I write software. Code is the way I work. So a lot of this work is custom software that I write. It's interactive, usually through the interaction is through the body. So I work a lot with dancers. Unlike some of the discussions earlier today, I don't actually perform myself. I produce these interactive systems that somebody else can use, either a dancer through their body, or sometimes I will use it, but I will use it in my studio to produce content. So I'm really interested in this real-time feedback loop between a system that outputs images or sound and the person using it. And that's what I felt was lacking in traditional animation software. And my interest in AI was born because all of this software that I write it's quite dumb. It does what I tell it to do. And I mean, I enjoy that, but I like the unpredictability of really complex systems. And I started getting into machine learning, whereby I'm going to talk about it a lot more. And this is really the heart of what I do. So for me, the most important aspect, also when I talk about my current research, it's human-in-the-loop machine learning and AI. So I'll skip to the main topic, which is AI. And it's really hot. And it's going to change the world. And this is what it looks like. It's very blue and shiny. And these are the trend graphs for the term AI in the news since about 2008. As you can see, it's really low. And then there's a spike in about 2012 when Google Brain Project did this thing where it watched YouTube and learned about cats. But then really in 2015 and 2016, there's a huge explosion in the term AI. And this should come as no surprise. This is the trend graph for the term big data, which is absolutely nothing until about 2011. Then at 2011, there's a massive explosion. It starts rising, and so in 2016, there's a massive explosion. And this should come as no surprise because, well, I like the metaphor of consciousness is evolution's solution to dealing with big data. I like this metaphor analogous to Darwinian evolution of how intelligence might have evolved in biology. And as simple organisms evolved and they developed more complex sensory motor systems, they also started acquiring more complex senses and related behaviors to more optimally respond to their environment. Especially this is quite prominent maybe around 540 million years ago when vision started to become, vision evolved. And along with this, some believe that the Cambrian explosion was triggered by this. And all of a sudden we had organisms with lots of high-dimensional data streaming in, and they had very limited neural pathways, so they had to somehow process this information and decide which input data to process, which to omit, and how to respond and evade predators or catch prey. And then maybe some even more higher level organisms started to learn how to not just respond, but learn how to model the environment. And they could make more efficient predictions about the environment this way. And then going even further, some organisms developed even higher levels of abstractions to be able to form social relationships. I can model each of you as an individual with emotions and feelings and thoughts. I don't think of you as an organic blob of thousands of molecules. There's this abstract layer through which I interact with you. So intelligence and big data is really, really linked from an evolutionary point of view. But also there's another reason why we're having an explosion of AI right now. And that is because the main explosion that we're having in AI is called machine learning. And the thing with machine learning is it really, really requires lots and lots of data. And it's no coincidence that the biggest funders and advocates of AI research, the Googles, the Facebooks, the startups, they're the same businesses whose business models rely on making sense of and understanding big data. And likewise with the GCHQ, the NSA, the Five Eyes, they've collected more data than they know what to do with, and they desperately need algorithms to process, compress, and understand that data. And they're all investing billions in this field. So it's safe to say that if World War I gave us analog computers and World War II gave us digital computers, and the Cold War gave us internet, it's this mass surveillance of targeted advertising and the war on terror which is giving us deep learning and AI. But I'm also really interested in the parallels between the current rise of AI and mass surveillance, and looking at it through the lens of the ultimate panopticon, that is religion, and the all-seeing eye of God. Because our deities have always co-evolved to match the needs of our societies and culture, and I'm fascinated by this new evolving form of overseer, which was originally invented to watch and protect as an instrument of control. And it was these ancient religions that imposed omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent powers watching over us. And these myths were fabricated to control the masses. And now, as we lose our spiritual sensibilities, drowning ourselves in materialism and technological submission, our overseer, too, is adapting and co-evolving. Its metaphysical traits are crumbling and becoming obsolete, but that void is filled with new traits. Physical, material, digital traits to match our physical, material, digital lifestyles. We don't fear the old gods anymore. They cannot protect or control us, so we need new ones. We have killed God, as Nietzsche says, but we are rebuilding him with technology to match our techno-culture. And the myth is becoming real, an authentic, man-made deity living up in the cloud, of all places, watching over us, listening to our thoughts and dreams in ones and zeros. So in 2014, I wrote a poem. It was a collaboration with Google. Not people working at Google, but the actual Google, the search engine, and it's more a collection of prayers. We have a very intimate connection with the cloud. We confide in it, we confess to it, we appeal to it, we share secrets with it. And Google is the keeper of our collective consciousness. It sees everything we see, knows everything we know, feels everything we feel. I'm not going to read the whole poem. I'll show a short video. It's basically, I write something into search, Google autocompletes. Inspired by that, I write something else. It's set to Personal Jesus, Marilyn Manson's cover of the Depeche Mode song, because I thought that here we do have a personal Jesus, someone you can reach out and touch faith. So bear in mind, in 2014, when I made this, these were the most searched terms. It's really quite heartbreaking, because a lot of it is, you know, I want to be skinny, I want to be beautiful, I want to be rich, I want to be British, that kind of stuff. But I'm going to move on. This theme comes up a lot. I realized this a few years ago. This clash between science and religion, or more broadly speaking, the tensions between science, technology, nature, ethics, ritual, tradition, religion. This is the kind of things, and that's why I spoke about the things I spoke about. I want to go on to the next project, which it's a performance from 2015, but it's a series that started in 2011 that I want to just go back to very quickly. So in 2011, it started out as an exploration into oscillations and the emergence of complex patterns and rhythms through the interaction of very simple oscillatory behavior. It was initially inspired by the movement of pendulums, something very simple, and visually and sonically inspired by the likes of John Whitney, Norman McLaren, Ligeti, Terry Riley, Steve Reich, obviously. And the idea is really simple. There's just a bunch of agents, as I would call them. In this case, they're just little circles going up and down with fixed frequency. But overall, the system is incredibly complex. And this idea of complexity from simplicity is a theme which I'm very interested in, and I think most people who explore generative art are very interested in. So this was 2011. I made many versions of many iterations and different incarnations of this. These are from 2013. These are 2014. The one I want to talk about is from 2015. It was commissioned by Future Everything, and it was performed in Manchester at the Royal Northern College of Music. I'm going to play a short excerpt. So again, here I was very inspired by the tensions between the frontiers of human knowledge and the rest of society. So between science, technology, and tradition, culture, ethics, religion, law. And they're always out of sync. They're always pulling on society from different angles and almost like ripping it apart. And every now and again it kind of comes in sync, but then it falls out of sync again. And it creates these quite uncomfortable moments and quite chaotic. And this is not something new. We're facing this right now, but obviously this has been around, since, when we switched to the heliocentric model of the solar system, IVF, genetic engineering, all that. And now we're again facing this with AI, automation, the trolley problem with self-driving cars. And it was here, all of these performers, they're all out of sync. They all have different BPMs. They're all wearing in-ear monitors. So each performer is actually a slave to a machine which is controlling the whole performance. In fact, someone on Twitter called this, called them meat puppets, which I really enjoyed. The performers don't actually have a full picture of the whole performance. They're told in their ear when to hit, when to step forward, when to put their light on. So they do these really simple tasks that are controlled by this machine, but overall the whole system exhibits this really complicated behavior and constantly drifting in and out of sync. So yeah, this tension between human and machine, I've always found really interesting. Um, but I want to go in a slightly different direction. I want to talk about learning. And I'm actually going to talk now some of my more recent research, which I'm really interested by, the idea of what does it mean to learn? What does it even mean to learn or to understand? Or maybe the difference between learning and memorizing, and how that's linked to perception and cognition. And the term AI, which we use, is a very broad and vague term. So I want to get away from that and talk about machine learning, which is where my research is in, actually. And machine learning is a subfield of AI. And in particular, I'm going to talk about deep learning, which is a subfield of machine learning. And what you're seeing is actually a deep neural network learning. This is it learning. This particular network is being fed images from the Hubble telescope and NASA's astronomy pick of the day. And at the same time as it's learning, it's also dreaming. And these words are very interesting to use in this context, but I'm going to come to why. So right now it's learning and it's reimagining. It's reevaluating and reconstructing everything that it knows. So what we're seeing is effectively the knowledge that this network has. It's all the knowledge that it has. It's the worldview of this network. And my interest in this field is not to anthropomorphize the networks, but use them as kind of metaphors to reflect on how we might perceive the world. And I'm going to talk a bit about this, how it works. And that's one of my main interests in this field, which is the philosophical implications linked to perception, cognition, intelligence, creativity, serendipity. But I'm also interested in the social and cultural and ethical impact of this emerging technology. But also on a very practical level, like I mentioned earlier, I'm interested in how it may enable or enhance artistic expression and enable human-machine collaborative creativity, which is basically what my PhD is about. So very quickly, why is learning important? So this is Lady Ada Lovelace, quite a legend mathematician, theoretical computer programmer. She was only 17 when she started working with and became the intellectual collaborator and peer of Charles Babbage, who was 42 at the time. And he's credited for being the grandfather of general-purpose computers. And it's through her notes that we know so much about these machines in the 1800s that he built and designed. And in her notes, there's centuries of foresight. For example, she wrote, "The analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns just as the jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves." And one of her most profound insights was that while Charles Babbage designed these machines to be able to, as general-purpose computers, to be able to calculate anything, he was still only interested in number crunching, in making mathematical calculations. But she went on to say, "The engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent." And that was in 1843. So yeah, she was probably one of the first visionaries who predicted computational art. But she said something which is very controversial today. She said, "The analytical engine has no pretensions whatsoever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order to perform. It can follow analysis, but it has no power of anticipating any analytical revelations or truths. Its province is to assist us in making available what we already acquainted with." And this is controversial because 2 centuries later, researchers are trying to prove her wrong. Researchers in so-called strong AI and researchers who are in so-called computation creativity. And about a century after this, in a seminal 1950 essay, Alan Turing in Computing, Machine and Intelligence asked the question, can machines think? And again, 7 decades later and 1 million papers later, we're not really closer to an answer. But in that essay, he kind of examines Lovelace's statement. And he calls it Lady Lovelace's objection. And he proposes that in order for a machine to be considered to originate anything, it has to surprise people, even its programmer. And he reframes that in the context of machines that can learn. Because he had already theorized something that neither Babbage nor Lovelace had thought of. He had theorized this concept of an organized machine that was loosely inspired by the neural networks in the brain that could learn. And he added, "Machines take me by surprise with great frequency." He later went on to say that we don't have to build an adult mind. If we can recreate the mind of a child that can learn, then, and give it the education, then we are on track. And so this is kind of why I'm so interested in machine learning as well. I'm going to skip a bit because I think I'm falling back on time. But I just wanted just a quick quote. We're getting really, really powerful technologies here, and we've always had issues with these tensions between science and technology and the rest of society. But the physicist Max Tegmark makes a really interesting observation. He refers to this thing called the wisdom race, whereby we invent cars, and then 50 years later we invent seatbelts, because we realize that people are dying in cars. But now as technology becomes more powerful, synthetic biology, nuclear power, and AI, we can't afford to let our wisdom fall behind. And one of my favorite quotes on the topic of technology going wrong is by Charles Babbage. This is the machine, one of his machines. He has a beautiful quote. On 2 occasions I have been asked by members of parliament, "Pray, Mr. Babbage, if you put into the machine wrong figures, will the right answers come out? I am not able rightly to apprehend the kind of confusion of ideas that could provoke such a question." And it's surprisingly easy to fall into this trap today. So I want to very quickly talk about machine learning before I talk about my current research, just to give you a bit of an idea of what it actually is, because it's not magic at all. You have a function y equals f of x. Usually we write the function f. So x is the input, it might be joystick, it might be user's body, and y is the output. In machine learning, you don't write f. You write a learning function, you give it, to give a simple example, you give it lots of example x's, lots of example y's, and it figures out what f should be. So you might give it loads of images, and then give it lots of labels, and it associates them. You might give it lots of sounds, and then give it lots of text, and it learns to map those sounds to text. So this is a really simple example of machine learning. But when the problem is really, really complex, with very high dimensional data, like images, the way you do that is you go deep. You build very deep networks. And every box here is maybe millions of numbers. It's just been simplified to this level. And your input is on the left in this particular case. And every layer, as you can see, it's organized in layers, is kind of like a neural network itself. Every layer is a function. It's a transformation in a very high dimensional space. And essentially, piping data through a neural network is a journey through multiple dimensions and transformations in space. It literally is that. So I want to talk a little bit about this, and I want to take you on such a journey.
The journey for each of us begins here. We're going to explore the cosmos in a ship of the imagination, unfettered by ordinary limits on speed and size, drawn by the music of cosmic harmonies. It can take us anywhere in space and time. Perfect as a snowflake, organic as a dandelion seed, it will carry us to worlds of dreams and worlds of facts. Come with me.
So this is what you might find in the depths of one of these neural networks. This is Deep Dream. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. If you have seen it before, you probably hate it already because it's only maybe interesting for a few minutes for most people. I really love Deep Dream, but not because of the aesthetics, but the conceptually what's happening, which I'm going to talk about, which is the kind of basis of my research in this field. Just to explain loosely what's happening is it's a deep convolutional neural network. It's loosely inspired by our own visual cortex in that the layers, there's kind of convolution filters and it kind of learns features in kind of hierarchies. This particular network has been trained on millions of images. So you show the network millions of images, animals, submarines, houses, airplanes, tractors, whatever. And it learns how to represent those images. And then you show it something it hasn't seen, for example, me. And usually this network was trained to guess what it's seeing and to say this is an airplane or this is a person. In this particular case, what you do is you look at some of the neurons, you pick a bunch of neurons deep inside the network that might fire, and then you try to maximize that. You say, what must I do to the input to maximize those neurons? So maybe I don't look like a bird, I'm not a bird, but there's something bird-like about me. Some of the bird neurons fire. So you maximize those features in the input to get that. This is a bit like you look at a cloud and you see a rabbit. You know it's not a rabbit, but you see rabbit-like features in there. But in this particular case, you make the network generate that image and then you feed it back in. So it's like you looking at a cloud, you kind of see a rabbit, so you draw it as a rabbit. Then you look at that again, and then you say, what do you see? I see a rabbit. So there's this feedback loop. It's basic confirmation bias. So that's one thing that I really like about it. But then the other main thing is, people often complain that there's deep dreams all about puppy slugs and bird lizards and reptiles. But actually, there are no birds or lizards or reptiles here at all. There are only reptile-like, bird-like, lizard-like features. So in our brain, the lizard neuron is firing. And then we're projecting that meaning back onto it, the exact same way that this neuron, this network projected that meaning back onto it. So in effect, what's happening is we have white noise, and then that white noise is shaped by the neural network into something that's a little bit more recognizable, but then we project meaning back onto it. And that's what we do. We are meaning-making machines. Everything that I'm saying right now are just vibrations in the air. It makes no sense to the universe, but you are making meaning out of this. And this is a kind of underlying theme of a lot of my work. So I want to talk about this next project, which is a VR piece that Chris mentioned. And it's motivated by a few things, which I'm going to talk about. The first is exactly related to this. What we perceive to be real, what we see is a reconstruction in our minds. It's a simplified model of the world, limited by our biology and physiology. Perception, including vision, is an active process. It requires action and integration. The actions that we take affects the reality and the meaning that we construct in our mind. And perhaps most importantly, even when presented with the same information, the exact same images, everybody will experience something unique and personal, and which nobody else can maybe even understand. And I'm interested in these ideas at both a low level, regarding our senses, particularly vision, but also conceptually at a higher level regarding how we make meaning and what we consider to be the truth and our biases, and especially in these times of social polarization, how we fail to see other people's perspectives. So it's a VR installation which explores a phenomenon known as binocular rivalry. So some of the inspirations, for example, I don't know if you know the story of the Australian jewel beetle and the beer bottle. This is a male, and males, so this is a female, and males choose females based on three things. They've got to be brown, they've got to have dimples, and they've got to be big. And this has worked for millions of years until humans came along and started chucking beer bottles into the desert. And these beer bottles happen to be brown, they happen to have dimples, and they happen to be big, like really big. So the male beetles started trying to mate with these bottles instead of the females, and they almost went extinct until the beer company had to change their bottle design. And the point of this story is that these beetles have a very simplified perceptual model of the world. This male doesn't realize that that's not a female beetle, but it doesn't need a grasp on the full reality because this has worked for it. Another great example, quite famous, the German neurophysiologist Jörg Peter Ewert did lots of studies with toads, and he found that any shape that is thin and long and moves in the axis of its long thing will trigger the attack stimulus response chain in a toad. The same thing moving sideways, the toad won't attack. In fact, a toad will die if there are loads of actual worms which are moving sideways. It will not eat them. Furthermore, through some really, really grotesque experiments, which is what neuroscience is based on, they found that this filtering happens in the eye. The filtering in the eye determines whether it should attack on it, well, whether it's a prey or predator, and then the brain triggers the appropriate action. Again, a very simplified model of the world. The reason this is relevant is if you believe in the notion that God created man in his image, then these examples avoid. But if, like me, you believe in evolution and that we are the products of a random walk and descent with modification, then we are just merely a little bit further down this evolutionary path of beetles or toads. So there's no reason to believe that our cognitive abilities are, even though they are superior, are grasping the full range of reality, that what we see is a model that just serves us through evolution. And we know that to be real because we can hack our perception very easily. There's loads of examples. So the point too that I was making before was we often think of the eye as a camera, as in light falls on the retina and we see, but that's actually not how it happens. We also used to think that we shot rays out of the eyes, and that's how we saw. And really smart people, like Plato, believed this. But also around about the same time, it was known that that's not how we see. But one thing that this theory did get right is the fact that seeing is an active process, that light doesn't just fall on the eye. The actual bit that has high resolution is the fovea. It's absolutely tiny, about the size of a thumbnail at arm's length. But what we do is we constantly saccade. We scan the world. And actually the philosopher Al-Vanoui likens seeing with the eye. It's more like not a camera, but a blind person feeling their way. And as they move their hands and they're integrating the information from the movements of their hand and the signal that they're getting. In fact, he conducted loads of pretty torture-like looking experiments in the 50s and 60s to make these really amazing sketches. What he also found was that the way we scan a scene affects the meaning that we take. So if you ask somebody, how old are these people? Or what are they doing? Or what are they talking about? It affects the way that they scan the scene. And finally, before I talk about the actual project, binocular rivalry is a phenomenon where when the two eyes are presented radically different images, such as left eye might see this image, right eye might see that, the conscious visual experience is not a blend of the two. It's something like on the right. So this is what you actually see. It's not like dreaming. You physically see something like that. And moreover, it changes, it animates. It's also unique to everybody. So everybody will see something completely different. The speeds that they move is completely different. It might flicker between the two signals. It's completely unique. So based on these ideas, I made this VR piece. You walk into this room, you sit down on a chair and put the headset on. It's very difficult to convey, but I'll just give you an idea, because obviously, you're not going to get the experience. But just to give you an idea, and I'll choose this one, to give you an idea of what you kind of see, it's stuff like this. And for example, my personal experience when this is happening is I usually see red, the red lines, but you see the corner of that one. I see that corner in a kind of feathered circle moving around. One person reported like a line down the middle, and the left half of their vision was this side, the right side was the other side. Another person reported seeing one at a time. But for me, the mind-boggling aspect of this is what you physically see. You see it as real as I'm seeing you right now. And even though everybody is presented with the exact same images, they see in their conscious mind something different. So hopefully this is going to be at Sonar. It was commissioned by Stripe. I showed it at Eindhoven earlier this year. Hopefully it's going to be at Sonar in Barcelona. So the other thing was, seeing as an active process. So you also, as you look around, you're physically deforming the space, which affects the way that you kind of control the rivalry. After being immersed in this space for about 2 months, I find I can actually control it quite well now, and I can find situations in the real world where I can recreate it. It's quite... I almost got addicted to it at one point. Amazing score by Machine Fabric. We collaborated on it, and he wrote a 8-channel score, so it's binaurally spatialized. And this is what it looks like when people are experiencing it. Although, in honesty, I'll show this here. So this is a mode where you construct things as you look around. So this was kind of quite inspired by those experiments. It was Alfred Yarbus I mentioned from the 50s and 60s. The way you scan this scene affects the meaning that you take. So in this case, the way that you look around the scene affects what you construct. And that's why there's quite an unnatural looking head movement going on, because they're constructing a scene. So I want to get back to, that was an investigation of how we see, how we perceive the world. Now I want to get back to, how do machines see? How do they make sense of the world? And this is how Hollywood thinks that machines see and make sense of the world. This is, of course, how designers who design fictions think that machines see the world. I want to switch to some demos now. So one of my interests in deep learning is, most deep learning research right now is you get a bunch of data, you train, it trains for a day, a week, hours, whatever, and then you have a model. And then you give the model something, and the model generates something, and you have an output. But that doesn't really work with the way that I want to work, which is, this real-time interactive process. I want to use computational systems as an instrument. So my research is in, how do I manipulate? How do I find ways of manipulating deep learning models that I can control in real time and use to eventually creatively express myself? So that's basically my research. So one of the things I did So this is a deep neural network that's, I'll just start from scratch. Where's my mouse cursor? Okay. Okay, so the second cell is what the machine knows. It started completely blank, it knows absolutely nothing, completely randomly initialized, and it's looking at me, and it's trying to learn about me. Now, because I'm moving, it's having a hard time. I'm going to point it maybe at this thing. So now it's going to, okay, so it's starting to build a picture of this thing. And you can see the error graph there. All of these squares are the neuron activations. So now it kind of knows about this beer bottle, but if I, a beer can. But if I move it a bit, it lost it a bit, because it doesn't know that a beer can be moved. So if I keep doing this over a while, it will learn about this object. But I've never rotated it yet, because why should it assume that this thing is an object that can be rotated? So these are the kind of really interesting things that you realize. So if I hold it like this for a while, it will start to learn that, oh, this object can also be rotated. And I can maybe train it on you guys. And that sound you're hearing is probably my GPU crunching the numbers. So this was one of the experiments. I've got a little GUI here. Where I can actually play with a lot of parameters. Yeah, I call these things control freak, because I do like to play with parameters. For example, changing the training algorithm has a big effect. It's a bit more flickery, so I can do some pretty, if I increase the momentum. So by the way, this will have probably forgotten about the beer bottle by now. So if I come back to the beer bottle, the beer can, yeah, it's forgotten about it. So this is another interesting thing about forgetting. You need to keep bringing it back. But I want to go on to So this is really, really early work in progress, by the way, I should say. So that was a deep neural network that hasn't been trained on anything. It was completely fresh. This particular one, oh shit, hang on. So the resolution's a bit low because I'm running it on my laptop, so I'll zoom out a bit. This has been trained on the art collections of 150 museums around the world. So you might have seen something like style transfer. In fact, if you saw the Cold Cuts gig last night, they use a lot of style transfer. In style transfer, you basically take a photograph and then you take a painting and it learns the style of the painting, like, you know, Hokusai or whatever, and applies it to the photo. This is not style transfer. What this is this network has been trained on, like I said, 150 art collections around the world, like hundreds of thousands of paintings, and it's trying, that's all it's ever seen, and it's trying to make sense of what it sees through what it knows. So I've got now, every few seconds, I randomize a parameter. So the interesting thing here for me is, when people look at this, some people have said, oh, it's very, you know, Braquage, it's very Francis Bacon, it's very Dali. But that's what they see. So again, I'm really fascinated by this mirroring, that they're kind of doing what the network is doing. They're recognizing the only thing that they know. For example, I'm going to show something else in a bit. In fact, before I do that, I'll show this other output option. Oh, they're mostly white for some reason. So here what it's doing is, I'm randomizing a few parameters, but it's kind of morphing, but the morphing isn't a blend happening on a pixel level, it's a morph that's happening in the depths of this neural network. So I'm kind of morphing effectively the internal neuron activations. And the way the network works is there's these neuron activations, and they lead to a way of reconstructing an image. And so when you interpolate the neuron activations, the result is this kind of smoother output. So this was trained on 150 art collections around the world. I want to show another model, because I've got a ton of models. Oh, actually, no. So this is the same model, but in the previous thing, it was trying to make sense of, it was trying to visually reconstruct what it was seeing. In this particular case, I've kind of told it to go crazy, just do something loosely inspired by what you see. So it's not aesthetically trying to recreate what it's seeing, but it's somehow mapping what it's seeing into this crazy latent space, this really abstract space, and then projecting that back into reality. And so the output is way, way, way more abstract. Whereas in the previous version, it's somehow aesthetically matched. So I want to show another model. So this one's been trained on images from the Hubble telescope, and it's trying to reconstruct what it sees through what it knows. And as you can see, it's kind of recreating me here. And so the level of control that you can have, I can say, I want to make it dark, but not by darkening the picture. It's darkened, it's reconstructing something which is just darker. So I'm now more like made up of little galaxies. If I want to make it brighter for it, then it will start introducing more nebulas. If I want to make the background a bit brighter, it'll start introducing more cloudy stuff in the background as well. And let's see what you guys look like. So that's kind of the end of my talk. We are all made of stardust, remember that. And yeah, thank you for listening.